expand our minds and make us all think. Well, we are live this morning, and sorry we're a little bit late this morning, but we went a little bit over time on our other teaching this morning. So here we are. We got a great topic this morning for you guys. As you can tell, since we're late, it was a topic that just kept going on the other side. So it don't matter what it is that you're joining us, but we are glad that you are here. So welcome. Hang on, I'm going to send a couple little invites. Invites sent out. So there we are. We are live again. But anyways, what I want to do today is we want to talk about the hidden prison, the archons, identity, the war of consciousness. The kingdom within, and understanding the system that's around us to keep us distracted from that kingdom within. So take a breath with me. And just for a moment, slow everything down. Because what we are about to look at is not just a spiritual idea. Nah, it's not just philosophy. It is not just psychology. It is a pattern that touches the deepest layers of the human life. There's a prison that most people live inside and never see. And the reason they do not see it is because the prison is built out there, out of their own thoughts even. Yo, how's it going? Oh, fears, identities, and reactions even. And it does not always look like a cage. Sometimes it looks like ambition. Sometimes it looks like belonging, and sometimes it looks like opinion. Sometimes it looks like trauma even. Sometimes it looks like success. But underneath it all, there is a deeper system at work. A system that divides consciousness, fragments the self, and keeps human beings from realizing what they even are. And this is where the ancient Gnostic teachings becomes very powerful, because they spoke of the archons, ruling forces, powers, controllers, energies of beings that keep consciousness trapped in ignorance, confusion, and material unidentification. See, and whether one reads that literally or symbolically, the message is the same. Awareness is divided, truth becomes hard to see. And when the self is fragmented, the person becomes easier to control. And when people forget who they are, they can be made to live inside a false reality. So today, let's go deeper. Let's talk about the prison works and how it works and how it runs. Let's talk about how they've divided us. Let's talk about how to see clearly again. See, reality in the split self is one of the most important things to understand, is that suffering grows where consciousness is split. See, a human being can be physically alive but internally divided. They may say, I want peace, but inside they are full of fear. They may say, I want truth, but inside they are attached to being right, or being accepted, or being seen. So they'll say and do anything to get into that mode. They may say, I want freedom, but inside they keep returning to the same mental chain. And this is the split self. And this split self, it is not an accident. It is reinforced constantly and put over us. From childhood, people are taught to identify with labels. Your name, your role, your race, your religion, your class, your politics, your past, your wound, your reputation, your productivity, your image, your title, your home, your cars, your vehicles. These things can all become masks. And once masks become the identity, the person forgets there is something deeper inside it and behind it. And this is one of the oldest tricks of the prison system. It's got you then. It does not need to destroy you completely. It does not need to put bars and chains and everything to make you actually even know you're in prison. It only needs to divide you enough so that you cannot even stand in the wholeness. Because a divided consciousness is a distracted consciousness. And a distracted consciousness is easy to steer. And the question is not just, what do you believe? The deeper question is, who is believing? Who is reacting? Who is afraid? Who is being shaped, Who is looking through the eyes of the story? The Gnostics' worldview, the archons are connected to the rulers of the lower realm. Forces that keep consciousness bound to illusion, attachment, and ignorance. They're not simply demons in the cartoon sense. They represent powers of control, distortion, repetition, and false identity. They maintain the world of separation. And they keep people focused on surface appearances instead of deeper truth. They keep the soul identified with matter, status, fear, and external validation. And in that sense, the archons can be understood as forces that operate wherever consciousness is manipulated onto forgetting itself. This is about awakening to oneself, Mike. This is why the Gnostics spoke so often about awakening. Not because the world is meaningless, but because the world can be seen through a false lens. And if this lens is distorted, then the whole life feels distorted now, doesn't it? And if the mind is conditioned, then even truth can be mistaken for threat. And if the self is captured by images, then reality gets filtered through illusions. The archonic system in agnostic language is a system of enclosure. It keeps the soul spinning in lower identification. And that is why discernment is so important. Because not every force that speaks loudly is truth. Not every, structure that looks powerful is wise. And not every identity that feels familiar is real. See, that's how division works. Let's talk about it. It's about division because division is one of the main tools that this prison system works by. A prison does not need every person to be in chains. If it can keep them at war with one another and distracted to even recognize that they are in a prison themselves, a divided population is easier to manage and control than a united one. See, and this applies not only to social, but internally. When you are united, the system outside doesn't get to disrupt you. You're like the honey badger and you don't give no shits. See, inside the human being, division takes many forms. The mind says one thing and the body feels another, and the heart wants one path and the ego wants another, and the past pulls one direction, the future pulls another. And this constant split creates exhaustion, and exhaustion makes people more vulnerable to control. And in society, division is reinforced through fear, comparison, groups, identity, and outrages. All the, hey, how's it going? People are trained to see each other as categories before they see each other as humans. And once the label becomes more important, then the person's consciousness has been reduced. And this is not a political issue, this is a spiritual one. Because when a human being begins to live only as labels, they lose access to direct seeing. They stop perceiving truth. They start perceiving sides, and they stop asking what is real, and they start asking, what tribe am I protecting? That is a prison move. It narrows the field of awareness. It reduces the soul to a reaction. And the mind is a control field. And now let's go into the inner mechanism. Is the mind is powerful, but an unobserved mind can become a trap. Why? Because the mind does not only think, it interprets, it predicts, it remembers, it imagines. It creates entire worlds out of fragments. And if that mind has been wounded, conditioned, frightened, or trained by trauma, it will keep trying to protect you using old information. And that is why many people are not responding to the present moment. They are responding to the past. A person may say, I am just reacting to what happened today. But often the body and the mind are actually reacting to a memory of an old humiliation or an old abandonment or an old fear. And that is how the person stays alive. It feeds on repetition, the same story, the same wound, the same identity, the same inner argument, the same emotional loop. The system does not need to force every thought. It only needs to keep the mind busy enough that the person never becomes still enough to see clearly. Because when stillness comes, when stillness comes, illusion begins to weaken. And no one wants you in quietness or stillness. No. And look at this world trying to keep you so distracted by it. Your phones, the things going on in the world, all these different things trying to distract you from even having a moment of stillness. Why? Because this world is terrified of stillness. Because stillness is visibility. Stillness allows you to hear, feel, and identify, and see, and be. I see when a human being lives under chronic stress, the nervous system becomes shaped by survival, and the brain becomes more reactive. The body stays more alert, and the sense of threat becomes easier to trigger. And this means the person may not just be psychologically divided, but they may be biologically primed for reactivity. And in that state, the person becomes less able to reflect and more likely to defend, flee, collapse, or conform. And this matters because a dysregulated nervous system is more easily manipulated. If someone is always in fear, they will crave uncertainty. If someone is always overwhelmed, they will crave escape. If someone is always ashamed, they will crave approval. And if someone is always angry, they will crave someone to blame. And that is exactly how the system keeps us occupied and distracted. Not only by giving them information, but by stimulating their nervous system in ways that keeps them unable to center themselves and be still. This is why attention is sacred. Why do you think the system does everything to keep your attention everywhere you go? Because what captures your attention shapes your inner world. And what shapes your inner world shapes your choices. And nature teaches us something that the prison system never wants us to remember. Nature does not live in constant self-conflict. A river does not apologize for flowing, and a wolf does not become fragmented trying to, be something else. Nature lives in function, rhythm, and direct expression. And of course, nature has storms. And of course, nature has predictions, decay, and tension. But even in that, there is a larger order. There is movement. There is balance. There is intelligence. Humans, however, we're often taught to live against our own beings, to resist our own bodies even, to suppress our own truth, to divide our own nature into acceptable and unacceptable parts. And that inner war becomes a mirror of the outer world. And why nature is such a powerful teacher. It reminds us that the wholeness is not perfection. Wholeness is not having no conflict. Wholeness is being in the right relationship with what is. A lake does not need to prove itself. A mountain does not need to win an argument. A bird does not need to explain its existence. But human beings are taught to constantly explain, defend, compare, and justify. That constant pressure fractures awareness. And fractured awareness becomes a field where fear can grow. See, philosophy has long pointed towards the danger of living through appearances rather than essence. The Stoics understood that much of human suffering comes from misjudgment, not from the event itself, but from the story placed on the event. And that is a major theme here. The event is not the prison. The interpretation can be. And there is also deep philosophical questions been underneath all of this. Is what is the self? Are you your memory? Are you your role? Are you your emotions? Are you your trauma? Are you your opinions? Are you the thoughts that pass through your mind? Or are you the awareness in which all of these appear? These questions matters because the prison depends on false identification, and if you think you are the thought, then the thought controls you. And if you think you are the wound, then the wound defines you. And if you think you are the label, then the label limits you. But if you begin to see that what you are, that you are the witness, the observer, the presence behind the story, then the prison starts to lose its grip. This is one of the deepest liberations a human being can experience. Not because the world suddenly becomes easy, but because the world is no longer mistaken for your identity. The archonic patterns in life. See, now let's bring this down into everyday life. How does the prison actually work in normal living? It works through the subtle division. A person wakes up and immediately checks their phone. Their attention pulls outward before they have met themselves, and they compare their life to someone else's life. And then they feel behind, and then they try to perform, and then they suppress and their real feelings. And then, they wear the face that gets approved. And then they go through the day reacting instead of witnessing. And by evening, they are exhausted and disconnected. This is not just a bad habit. It is a pattern of fragmentation. Another example, a person receives criticism, right? And instead of hearing a feedback, they constantly and instantly hear danger. Why? Why is that? Because the mind is not only hearing the present, it is hearing all the past times it felt rejected. The current moment becomes, fused with the old pattern. The old fusion is where the prison tightens. Or consider social conflict. Someone sees a person with a different belief, a different background, or a different worldview, and instead of curiosity, they feel threat. And instead of presence, they feel identity, defense. Instead of truth, they feel loyalty to their side. Now the human being is no longer seeing, they are reacting. And reaction is one of the main languages of the prison. See, the trap of constant identification is one of the biggest prisons, is the need to constantly define oneself. I am this, I am that, I belong here, I do not belong there, I am safe only if this is true, I am threatened if this exists, and this is exhausting. And because the self becomes a battlefield of definitions now. But the deeper self is not the slogan. It is not a label. It is not a brand. It is not an argument. It is consciousness itself. And consciousness, when free, can observe without collapsing into every passing form. It becomes like the honey badger and don't give no shits. The observer does not deny reality. The observer sees reality more clearly because it is not buried in reaction now. And this is where spiritual practice becomes practical, like meditation, silence, breathe, walk in nature. Take a moment before speaking even. These are not small things. These are acts of liberation, because every time you pause before identification, the prison weakens. Every time you see a thought without obeying it, the prison weakens. Every time you choose presence over performance, this prison weakens. Trauma and the return to the past, though. Let's talk about trauma. Because one is one of the strongest ways the prison operates, right? When a person has unresolved trauma, the mind often keeps returning to the past. Why is that? Because the nervous system learned that the past is still dangerous. And the body remembers what the mind thinks has moved beyond. So a small event in the present can open a huge emotional reaction. A tone of voice, a look, a silence, a delay, a rejection, a world. And suddenly the person is no longer in the present. They are in an older chapter. And this is why trauma works. It is not just healing, it is waking up. Because trauma can become an unseen doorway into the prison of repeated identity. And a person begins to say, this is just who I am. But often what they mean is, this is the wound I have lived inside for so long that I forgot it was a wound. And once again, awareness is the key, not judgment, not force, awareness. Because the thing that is seen clearly begins to lose some of its power. What the prison fears is, so what does this prison fear? It fears direct awareness. It fears silence. It fears grounded presence. It fears people who know how to observe without panic, and it fears those who are not easily divided. It fears those who refuse to collapse into labels. And it fears those who can see both the wound and the pattern. And it fears those who ask, who benefits from my confusion? And it fears those who can sit in the nature and feel the truth without needing noise. It fears anyone who starts to remember that there is a center within them, untouched by the system around them. And that center is dangerous to illusion. Because from the center, a person becomes harder to manipulate, harder to divide, harder to deceive, harder to own. And this is why awakening is not just comfort. Awakening is resistance. See, the Gnostics often points inward for a reason. The kingdom is within, not because the outer world does not matter, because the outer world cannot be truly understood until the inner world is seen. The kingdom within is the space where awareness is no longer fully captured by the prison. It is the place where the false self loosens. It is the place where the soul remembers, and remembering is powerful. Because most people think awakening is about becoming something new. But often it is about remembering what was never truly lost. You are not the fear. You are not the label. You are not the reaction. You are not the reaction at all. You are not the split either. You are the one who can see the split, and that seeing is the beginning of freedom. So what do we do with all of this? We do not become obsessed with the prison. No. We become skilled in seeing it. There is simply a practice, so pause, breathe, look around, and ask, what is real right now? What is actually happening? What am I adding? What am I assuming? And what am I afraid of? What identity is being activated? What old pain is being touched? And what would remain if I stopped telling the story for one moment? And these questions are powerful because they return you to direct experience. And direct experience is where the truth lives. Not in the noise, not in the storyline, not in the performance, not in the moment. That is where clarity comes back. So remember this. The prison is not only outside of you, it is also a pattern inside consciousness, and it works by dividing you, by identifying you, by keeping you reactive, by making you confuse the story for reality. But when you begin to observe, the spell weakens. And when you begin to pause, the trance loosens. And when you begin to see, the veil thins. And when the veil thins, the soul remembers itself. So stand grounded. Like a rod of steel down your spine, do not hand your life over to every thought. Do not make every feeling your identity, and do not let the system name you before you know yourself. So breathe, observe, and see clearly, and ask what is real. Because the moment you can see the mechanism, you are no longer fully inside. And that is where freedom begins. So peace and love. We'll see you guys next time.